shoes are such loaded topics. I mean, just the change of a heel height or a heel shape can make you feel totally different about the person who's wearing the shoe, about the shoe. They're just loaded.
Gaza Bowen is a shoemaker who has brought high art to footwear. Beginning as a sandal maker in California in the 1960s, Gaza moved her business to a shop in Massachusetts and learned shoe repair from the owner during the winter season. She currently maintains a studio in Santa Cruz, California, where she successfully combines the need for functional footwear with her own personal wit and sense of design.
I've never looked at something and thought, I don't know how to make that. I've always thought, oh, I can figure that out. And that's pretty much the way I make shoes. I kind of figure it out as I go along. I've taught myself a lot, and I've discovered things. I do some things that aren't orthodox at all, and I'm sure, you know, John Lobb, the Queen's Shoemaker of London, would probably keel over if he saw some of my techniques. But they work, and they're fine. I'd done shoe repair for several years, about 4 years, and I saw an ad up where I bought leather for a class taught by a man from Colonial Williamsburg in shoemaking. And it was a 2-month intensive every day, 8 hours a day for 2 months. And that's the formal training that I had. The man I was working for was from Italy and had been trained as a shoemaker. And he knew how to make shoes, but he was very covetous of his information. He didn't give his information freely and would teach me small amounts of things, but just enough to get my curiosity going. There's not a lot of information about making shoes around. There are very few books, and the ones that I found are really old, and so a lot of it is obsolete. A lot of it is really good information, but there's not a lot of it out there. And there are very few people who make shoes, and there are even fewer people who make shoes who are open to sharing information. You know, there's a real macho trip going on. It's very difficult to find people who are open and giving of information. So I feel really fortunate because of the shoe repair background. I could mesh modern technology with ancient processes. And I needed the ancient processes because I work by hand in my house. I don't have access to a factory, and a lot of things that could be done in a factory I can't do. So it was the perfect blending of those two things. The first real series of boots that I made were all related to quilts. I was living in Maine, and I thought I'd really like to make a quilt of every kind, you know, a trapunto quilt and a log cabin quilt, but I don't possibly have enough time, so I'll make a pair of shoes around each of those quilting techniques. And then I discovered that it took just as long or longer to make a pair of boots using those techniques. But each technique somehow very easily flowed into a pair of shoes. And I did get to explore a lot about quilt making and traditional patterns and inventing some of my own. And
she experimented with making her own felt, but found it to be too time-consuming. What she really wanted was to make shoes. She found industrial felt to be the answer. It could be dyed, shaped, and formed using the same techniques as leather.
I see now I'm working all primarily in leather, that I'm still making quilts. I'm still taking whole hides of leather, cutting them into little pieces, sewing them all together, and making a shoe, which is what a quilt is, really. And I see right now, any shoe that I've made, I look at it and I see that it's directly related to quilt making and to my earlier work. If you looked at all my work as a body, I think there's several different lines of kind of images going on, and one of them is really personal. And I work well with people, talking to them about who they are and what kind of colors they like, and getting to know them or see what they're wearing. And somehow I'm very easily able to take that information and then spew out the shoe that the person really feels personal about. Like, yes, those are my shoes. How did you do it? And I don't know how I do it. And that's going on. But also, I dream up shoes that are just for me, that are just, they spring out of my mind, and they aren't really related to another person. And some of those actually come from dreams, like these shoes that I'm wearing are, I dreamed them. And I woke up and I had to make them in 1 week because I was leaving for New York and I didn't have a thing to wear. And so I had to make these shoes, and I woke up one morning and I knew exactly how they were going to look, and I even knew the construction, how they would have an outside seam that would be opened and flattened and painted, and that was all there. And the heels were there, and all I had to do was make them, which is pretty unusual because usually as I make the shoe, I work on the colors, and some of the techniques even come as I'm making it. But these were just there. And so some things really come right out of my dreams. And some things come out of a fascination with a material or with a technique, like the technique I'm using now of cutting these triangles and folding them back and painting them. That is so fascinating to me, and I want to, you know, I can think, the minute I did that the first time, I could just see 15 different variations that I want to try on that one theme of cutting a triangle and folding it back, and how each one could be a shoe or lead into a shoe. So I'd be exploring that technique, but then once I start working on the shoe, I end up exploring a hell of a lot more than just that one technique. One thing that I learned in Williamsburg was how to last a shoe, and lasting is a verb and a noun, and it's a form that a shoe is built around. And often they're made of wood, hardwood, and now factories are using plastic and nylon lasts. But when I was visiting Maine a lot and collecting shoe tools, I also collected lasts, and I have a huge collection of them. I alter my lasts somewhat, like I can make them wider across the ball of the foot or narrower, and do a certain amount of alterations, especially on the toe shape. But there's some things that I can't really alter, like heel height. And so it takes a lot. I have to have like a library of lasts so that I can reach for the right one to fit the foot or to make the shoe look the way I want it to. Then as a verb, lasting is taking the leather that's been sewn and finished as a shoe, except that it isn't shaped like a shoe, but all the work is done. All the pipings or inlays, overlays, whatever I'm going to do to the shoe is done. All the stitches are in. It's a completed shoe, and it's placed on the last and dampened and forced over this shape and tacked in place. And then when it dries, it retains that shape. And then the outer sole goes on over all of that. But the whole time I'm doing all of that finishing, the shoe is like a solid object. You know, it's three-dimensional, but it's solid until it's completely finished. And then the last is taken out. I quite often start just by sketching on the last, or I'll cover the last in masking tape, or a brown paper bag, or sometimes a cloth, a piece of white canvas, because it stretches and conforms. And then I can sketch right on the last. Or more recently, I've been taking a shape like a circle and seeing what has to be done to that circle for it to conform to this shape. Like with a circle, it has to be cut into the center so it can spread. And working right on the last, I design the pieces that will be cut out of leather and sewn together to make the shoe. And they're usually cut of brown paper bag and taped on, and they have little numbers on them or notes to myself. Then I take all of those pieces off and flatten them and very carefully redraft the pattern with a ruler and a pencil and tracing paper, usually. So I end up with a stack of patterns, and they'll have seam allowances on them too. It's formally called dissecting the pattern. I usually have the shoe pretty well designed on paper and my patterns made, and then I go to choose my colors, which I usually do in the morning. And I keep my leathers, I use kid skin now, and they come in amazing colors from the tannery. I don't dye my own at all. And I keep them in rolls of similar colors. I'll have a whole roll of pinks and a roll of blues, and I'll bring them out and unroll them. But color is also a struggle, and I'm always amazed at how the amount of a color matters, of course. You know, like if it's a lot of blue, it's going to feel entirely different than just a thin line. So as I choose my color, I have to do kind of a mock-up to get the proportion right, and I'll have just a line of blue showing and lay a pink hide over it, and it gets pretty wild. You know, eventually every piece of leather I own is strung all over the studio, and I'm cutting little pieces and changing my mind and that kind of working it out. So I put the pattern on the leather and trace it and cut it, and then usually put a number on it that goes to the pattern number, and then I sit down and skive the pieces. Skiving is taking the leather down gradually so that when two pieces overlap, there's not a ridge that shows. When I lived in Maine and I was doing my first series of quilt-related boots, I was using a home sewing machine for the fabric parts. Whenever I had to sew leather, I did it by hand, the way I was taught at Williamsburg. And when I moved to California, I eventually bought a really nice leather sewing machine, and it changed my perspective on the use of time immediately. I all of a sudden couldn't imagine sitting for an hour and sewing a seam. The machine I have now is my dream machine. It was designed for cowboy boot upper makers. Your work is balanced between two wheels on a very small point, which gives you complete flexibility for stitching. And it also takes a tiny needle and does tiny stitches. I can stitch 20 stitches, 26, 28. I could even stitch 30 stitches to the inch on this machine. It has a very fine stitch, and the material is very maneuverable. It gives me a lot of freedom, and I feel, has helped my craftsmanship, or at least it caught up with my craftsmanship, whereas before my sewing machine was holding me back. I still do a lot by hand, and I could make a pair of shoes completely by hand, and that is a real exciting part to me, that I could pack up some hand tools and a roll of leather and a last and come visit you, and while I was visiting you, I could make you a pair of shoes. And that, I think, is just really exciting, and that's exactly how shoes were made at a certain point in history in this country, when there were journeyman shoemakers, and they would come and stay with your family for a month and make all the shoes, and they carried their tools in their apron. But I also do like machinery a lot, and if I could afford it, I would probably collect sewing machines because they're so wonderful what they do. And there's something about being a craftsperson and working with machinery. I think machines are tools. They're just a little more sophisticated. And I have the same respect for them that I do for hand tools. They do amazing things. And in the right hands, they can produce something really beautiful.
Gaza uses a variety of techniques to create the elements of her shoes, the vamp, sole, and heel, the way she wants. Her unique designs add character and life to her work.
One technique that I've been experimenting with a lot and using is plating, just simple over-under weaving. It's a way for me to make a checkerboard, or if it's done at an angle, I can create a texture or a pattern. And I can use at least 2 colors, maybe more, so it's a way for me to get a lot of color and a lot of movement. This plating is going to be checkerboard. I'm going to try to keep it perfectly square because that's what I want it to look like. And it's going to be about 1/3 of the vamp of a shoe combined with strips of color. And I'm making it for a friend of mine who is a rug weaver. And I saw one of her rugs, and it had black and white checkerboards in it, and it had these stripes of colors that are very much her colors, very warm reds. And this is going to be a pair of shoes for her. Another technique that's been exciting to me are turned seam allowance. It's an outside, the seam is brought to the outside and opened out and flattened and painted a color. And it's a really great technique for shoemaking because it eliminates bumps on the insides. And then I have a whole new surface to apply color to. It gives me yet another place to put color. I haven't done too much painting on shoes except for the fold backs that I make, which is where I cut out a triangle, or I cut 2 sides of a triangle and wet the leather and then iron the flat back and paint that exposed surface. And then it leaves a triangular hole which I can put an inlay of another color. So on one tiny area I can get 3 colors, which is something I'm always after, is how to get more and more color into my shoes and how to put color where I want it to go. One process or method that I'm really excited about right now is similar to lasting because it's wet forming, and the leather is cut flat and wet, and then I twist it and tack it to a piece of wood, and it dries in that shape. And once it's dry, it will not go back flat again. So it keeps that shape. It's called wet forming. And then once that's done, the inside of the leather is exposed. Rather than the grain side, I'm wanting to see what's known as the flesh side of the leather. And on some leathers, it's very trimmed and very sueded and very beautiful. And I'm painting on those surfaces. This is going to be part of a belt. It's a component. I'm going to make a whole string of these and button them together. But in the future, this could be a vamp. I see it as like a sandal vamp, an enlarged version. And perhaps in here I could put a ruffle of snakeskin and do more painting. The ones that I've made in the past are very tailored, and all the edges are turned. They're very hard-edged. And these are becoming more organic. The forms are more organic, but it's still a component belt. It's still going to be made of sections that button, and you alter the size by unbuttoning a component and not using it that day. I originally saw belts as a way of making a sketch, and they would be, I could play, like with this technique, I could play with a technique or an idea or a color combination quicker than with a pair of shoes. I can make a belt in a day, and it would be like sketching, and I could move on to other ideas, and I would bring that into my shoemaking, and that does happen. But I also find that I'll make a pair of shoes, and then I'll end up saying, that would make a damn nice belt, and then I'll take something out of those shoes and it'll go into a belt. So they're constantly feeding each other.
Gaza finds belts much more practical in the sense of making a saleable item. Belts take less time to make, they're adjustable, and more affordable to the casual buyer in a shop or gallery. Gaza not only sells accessories and shoes, but also maintains a collection of footwear ranging from historical fashion periods and various ethnic cultures to absurd, wacky shoes from flea markets.
I also collect shoe jewelry. And it started with shoe charms, which I wear on my ear as earrings, and then I began seeing pendants and pins, and it went on, and now I have quite a collection of jewelry that's related to shoes, and miniature shoes, and bottle openers that are shaped like shoes, and et cetera, et cetera. I haven't stooped to collecting planters that are shaped like shoes. That's where I drew the line. I said, you know, no China shoes. Some shoes are just for me, in a way. They don't necessarily fit my foot, but they're because I want to see that shoe exist. And so I've dreamed it up, and I want to play around with it, and I just choose a size. I try to choose average sizes, but not always. Sometimes the name of a piece will come first, like the title will pop into my mind, and then the shoe will come from a little phrase or something, like with a pair of shoes I made called Wedge-O-Matics. That word just sprang into my mind. Oh, actually, I was thinking before, I was driving in traffic, and this pickup truck was in front of me, and it said, Protecto Top, these, you know, tops for camper shells, and that just was hysterical. I just thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, and I began seeing more and more in our language all these made-up words with hyphenated little, the way they're made, and I thought of Wedge-O-Matic and how funny a word that was, and then how a Wedge-O-Matic is kind of like what I am. You just put leather in and out pop these shoes. It would be kind of like an appliance, and then the shoe just evolved from there. I wanted the shoe to say Wedge-O-Matic, so I invented a way to write on the heel by cutting the letters out. And then the toe decoration came about, it looks kind of like a pizza, and it's actually scraps that I've been saving. Often the title does come first, or as I'm working on a shoe, the title will come, and then the shoe will take a new direction or become more so than what I headed for in the beginning. The other type of work that I'm involved in is custom work. It's really commission work. It's not custom. I don't let people tell me what they want their shoes to look like, but someone will commission me to make them a shoe. I'll measure their foot, and we'll talk about heel height, when they want to wear their shoe. Do they want it a really dress shoe, or do they want to wear it with jeans every day? And if there are any colors they hate. Those are the limitations that I allowed them. And then I customize the last to fit them, and I work with those things in mind on whatever the next shoe is I want to be making. I say I don't have to make functional shoes, but I've always had to. And I've had friends who've said, don't make it functional, don't worry. And it would free me a lot, because I collect a lot of materials that I'm not able to incorporate into a shoe because they're not functional. They'll break, or they'll fall off, or they just wouldn't work. But I have felt that that was a limitation that I chose that helped me somehow. It gave me a direction, or it was a needed limitation. And I am beginning now to think about making shoes that aren't worn, that aren't functional, to more explore some questions I have about what shoes are all about that I can't really explore if I have that limitation. They have to be wearable. Then I can't get as silly as I'd like to get, or I can't maybe get as serious. There were really 2 points where my work changed from me just being a sandal maker or someone interested in shoes and making shoes into someone who shows at galleries. It seems like one point, first of all, I was sick of making brown leather sandals, but mainly when I learned how to make a shoe, it was really exciting, and I began making shoes for the people that I knew, and most of the people that I knew and know are artists, and sometimes we would collaborate on the shoes, and sometimes they'd be all my ideas, but the shoes came out the way my shoes come out, and people started telling me, you know, these should be shown, you should show them in galleries, and I really thought that that was ridiculous. But a show came up in 1978 at the American Craft Museum, the Great American Foot, and through my friends saying, come on, Gaza, send them some slides, see what they say, I did. And that was actually the first show that I was ever in. And I think a bit prematurely, it made me a person who showed my shoes in galleries. I don't know if I was ready for it or not. I don't know if anyone's ever ready for it. And the other moment was really a time when I was living in Maine, and it was a real personal decision. I felt like I can't go on being some hippie who makes shoes forever. You know, I remember the moment of saying that to myself, and then proceeded to have professional photographs taken, send away to get in shows and meet people, and it was a very natural process. And I do show my work at galleries, and I think that it is important as far as exposure and letting people know what I'm doing. Otherwise, I could just be a person who lives in Santa Cruz and makes shoes. And showing my work is important because I am trying to communicate to people. And I do want to find people who know what I'm talking about and who get a kick out of it, or who I'm communicating with.